All right. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce someone who is introducing our next guest, who has worked closely with him over the years. Matt Hayden is the former Assistant Secretary for Homeland Security for Cyber, Infrastructure, Risk and Resilience Policy at DHS. And Matt, I'm also very pleased to say, is one of our newest Cipher Brief members. Hey, how are you doing, Matt?
Fine, thanks. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thanks so much for introducing our keynote interview guest today. I'm going to turn it over to you for just a couple minutes, and I will be back as soon as you're done.
All right. Well, thank you, Suzanne, and thanks to the Cyber Brief for having me. This is a great opportunity. Wanted to just touch off Brandon's background a little bit. Ever since he became the acting director of CISA, starting around November of 2020, he became more of a famous CISA rock star. But by no means did this individual come into the national security bubble quietly, and nor is he a new entrant. Brandon also holds our Distinguished Service Medal, which is the highest award the DHS offers. He's the senior civilian leader, that's the executive director of CISA, and he's been in this business, if you will, since 2005 with DHS, and before that, national security has been his focus, as well as looking into international affairs and critical protection of the infrastructure that we depend on every day. The one thing I wanted to get across is that you can't do justice to a Brandon Wales interview without giving a full picture of what's on his plate. I can say that we shared many a conversation leading out of the past administration about what is the day-to-day of a CISA director. This being a cybersecurity event and cybersecurity being a #1 focus at CISA, it's just not the only focus. He has physical security, he has a number of programs that all fall under the CISA wheelhouse, most notably election security. With the recent election in 2020, that just starts the clock for 2024. With the departing director Krebs' vision being laid out in such detail, it's now on Brandon's shoulders to optimize that vision and get it out there. And part of that vision is a regional footprint. So CISA isn't just a DC box. It is an across the nation resource for critical infrastructure and our federal partners across the domestic space. I'll also stop there and say that you can't do any better than to have General Petraeus and Kevin Mandia tee up a conversation like this, and they did a great job with SolarWinds and the exchange vulnerabilities, the ramping up of ICS security, and the state and local focus. All of this has fallen to Brandon, who's more than capable for the job. And with this administration taking a strong focus at state and local, he's definitely going to be teed up for some great questions with you, Suzanne. I think that you're going to have a good conversation. I'd also outline that he has a school safety, religious organizations, and even space critical infrastructure under his belt. So feel free to hit him up on any of those subjects. He's an expert on all of them. So I'm jealous of your conversation, and I'll be an avid listener.
Matt, thank you so much. I really appreciate the introduction. I think it's always nice to get a little color on who you're talking to, because at the end of the day, it's just impossible to get into all the the work that's gone into getting people where they are. We really appreciate that. And I hope, Matt, that you, as well as the hundreds of people listening, will use that chat box in your control panel to go ahead and send your questions as well during this conversation. So thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And with that, Acting Director Brandon Wales, I really, my gosh, we've heard a lot about how tough your job is, how busy you are these days, just in the last session there with Kevin and General Petraeus. Thanks so much for being here, first of all.
No, thank you.
It sounds like, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was going to say thank you for inviting me. Really happy to talk to you and the hundreds of people online on this incredibly important topic.
Yeah, I think there's just so much to kind of unpack just from the opening sessions that we had earlier today and the last session alone. And it sounds like there's just so much that CISA has been tasked with. Let's just take a moment and back up and follow sort of Matt's advice on day-to-day. Give us real quickly kind of the day-to-day of your life in this new, really complex cyber environment.
So it absolutely is complex, and I think Matt highlighted well that we are in a dynamic environment. Since November, when I assumed this role, coming in the aftermath of the election, we still had work to do supporting our state and local election officials who were still in the process of certifying and auditing the results of the election. We're completing after action reviews about our own performance during the election to make sure that we can improve on the accomplishments of 2020 as we look forward to 22 and 24. And then mid-December, with the full outing of the SolarWinds compromise and the impacts from there, the job obviously has gotten a lot more challenging. But I will say that I'm extremely lucky. I get to everyday work side by side with a couple of thousand of the top professionals in the country when it comes to homeland security, critical infrastructure protection, cybersecurity, emergency communications, and they make this job a lot easier because I know I've got an incredible team behind me helping me achieve this mission, and I'm here to help support and enable them. I would say just in terms of my big priorities coming into this position, we're really kind of fourfold. One, make sure that we're postured well for the 22 and 24 elections by fully understanding what happened in 20 and what we need to do to improve our performance. Two, make sure that we continue to surge support that we had been providing over the past year to the COVID response, making sure that we're providing the right degree of cybersecurity and physical security support to companies involved in the vaccine supply chain and to health delivery organizations that are critical to the COVID response. Third, continuing to enhance the work that we're doing to protect the federal .gov environment. That obviously was made a lot more significant and important following the SolarWinds compromise. And then finally, to help improve inside of CISA our operational efficiency and effectiveness. My job kind of in this transition period is to make sure that this organization is primed and ready as new political leadership comes in, that we are better able to execute the priorities that they have, whatever those might be, and make sure that the organization is capable of doing that. So that's where my head is at. That's what I'm trying to drive forward every single day.
Yeah, I know that one of the main questions, and you mentioned this, and it was mentioned earlier during the summit today, is that mission to protect the government. I think SolarWinds was, I hate to keep using a tired phrase of wake-up call, because a lot of people have known that the government and all of the different entities within government have vulnerabilities if they're not kind of all brought together. Any sense of sort of like progress on that mission? What you've learned since SolarWinds was disclosed, and how you think, like, sort of strategically, is that something that should still continue to be a part of CISA's purview as there are all these other things that are sort of like coming to light now?
I think that the work that we do to protect the federal, civilian, executive branch departments and agencies from a cybersecurity perspective is really core of what CISA does. It gives us tremendous insight in terms of what that cyber threat landscape is, and helps enable us to do a better job of sharing and supporting the state, local, and private sector community more generally with our both knowledge and the benefits from that work. But I think, as you highlight, SolarWinds, I don't necessarily know for the folks in CISA who have to live and breathe this every day was as much a wake-up call, but I think it certainly galvanized the community. I think it kind of was a good shock to the system, where now we're getting a lot of attention into an area that probably wasn't getting it before. When I talked to DHS Secretary Mayorkas, I told him we needed three things to be more successful when it came to protecting the .gov. We needed improved authorities, we needed additional resources, and we needed to ensure that the entire interagency was pulling in the same direction. We were lucky enough in the recently passed National Defense Authorization Act to get additional authorities that allows us to both hunt on networks looking for adversary activity, but also to deploy in a non-reimbursable way cybersecurity services to our federal interagency partners. Second, we worked hard and were lucky enough to get some additional resources as part of the COVID supplemental, the American Rescue Plan Act that just passed. That money is a good down payment on building additional capabilities that will be critical for us to identify activity in the .gov earlier and be able to take responsive action more quickly. And the third is where our partnership with the National Security Council and with Ann Neuberger and her new role as Deputy National Security Advisor is critical. She is helping to ensure that the entire government is moving in the same direction. And I think as she announced a few weeks ago, there'll be a forthcoming cybersecurity executive order that I think will push us, again, further in that same direction. And those 3 items that I talked to the Secretary about early on will have kind of all come together. And I think now that burden is on CISA to take those new authorities, take those additional resources, and begin to put in place enhanced protections. And a lot of this has to do with improving the visibility that both CISA and the agencies themselves have into their networks, into their cloud environments, to make sure that we are just better able to detect and respond when cyber incidents are coming our way.
Let me ask you as well, there's a lot of conversation between Kevin Mandy and General Petraeus, and there has been multiple others in the cyber space about the need for a domestic version of what the NSA does overseas. And I know we're looking forward to welcoming the former General Counsel of the NSA, Glenn Gerstel, to this summit on Thursday to talk about some of his ideas about that. But do you think CISA would be the right place for something like this, to continue to expand authorities, expand the resources that you've needed to take on your it seems like ever-growing mission? Is CISA the right place to sort of have the conversation about becoming the home for a new domestic version of the NSA?
So, I think a lot of that would depend upon what you mean by domestic version of the NSA. The NSA obviously has a varied mission. It's got a cybersecurity directorate, but obviously it's got a very significant SIGINT role. Domestically, we already have an agency that has the ability to collect intelligence, and that's the FBI. And we are fortunate to have a great partnership with the FBI that's grown significantly in the past several years. And their ability to collect information domestically using their lawful processes and other tools is fantastic, and we want to leverage that to the maximum extent possible. I will say that we benefit substantially from our role as not an intelligence collector, but as a recipient, and as in a lot of cases as a belly button between the intelligence community and the state and locals and the private sector, bringing that information to them where they need it. And I think that role has served us well. I'm not going to say that we don't need more resources. We do not need to grow. We are not likely to need additional authorities in the months and years to come, because we certainly will, to be able to fulfill the broad mandate that this agency has. And we're eager to pursue that over the next with this Congress and the next.
And CISA is really sort of the government's home base for dealing with the private sector, which is, of course, our very favorite topic at the Cipher Brief, because it's so critical overall for the future of U.S. national security that the public and private sectors are able to have some sort of collaborative effort in terms of sharing that threat intelligence information, not over days, but within the speed of the network attackers, if you will. How's CISA doing on that? And what could we do sort of short term, if you don't mind me asking, that might be a big help in terms of sharing information faster?
Sure. So, and absolutely, our relationship with the private sector is essential to us achieving our success. We spend a lot of time working with the private sector in multiple capacities. Cyber is frankly the most recent, but going back to the early days of the department and to CISA's predecessor organizations, working in the counterterrorism space in areas that we still do, for example, countering domestic violent extremists, working with schools and faith-based organizations and others. But in the cyber context, our relationship is critical. We are fortunate as a nation that we have such an active private sector that works in this space, that we have companies like FireEye and leaders like Kevin who recognize the value of the partnership with the federal government, who are bringing information to bear to actually help improve our collective defense between the government and the private sector. And that happens today. We're having regular meetings, sometimes multiple times a week, with the private sector around ongoing cyber incidents to collect and understand what they know, share what we know, and try to identify what are good paths forward to take action that will improve our overall security or respond to an incident like the exploitation of the recently announced Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities.
Right. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that actually, because I had just seen when I was kind of reading before our conversation this morning that you're kind of urging organizations not to have a false sense of security when it comes to vulnerabilities. This is kind of one of the things that you do, but can you expand on that when it comes to this specific software?
Yeah, and I mentioned this yesterday at an event, and I want to reinforce it at every opportunity I have. I think, we have long preached that you should patch your systems, make sure you apply those security updates because it's essential to protecting your networks. But, and particularly in this case, patching is not sufficient. We know that the multiple adversaries have compromised networks prior to patches being applied. And if you apply the patch, your system may still be compromised. The adversary may still be inside of your network, still be able to utilize you to attack others and to disrupt your operations. And so you should not have a false sense of security. You should take you should fully understand the risk environment you're under. In this case, how to identify whether your system is already compromised, how to remediate it, and whether you should bring in a third party if you're not capable of doing that. But that is essential because we know in this case that there are literally thousands of compromised Microsoft Exchange servers that are already patched. And that means that those system operators could be under a false sense of security. They could believe that they have been protected, but in fact, it's too late.
I'm going to get really practical for just a minute because I know a lot of people, a lot of companies and businesses understand that CISA has a website where a lot of these statements that you put out are listed. It kind of tells companies what to do as opposed to just hearing the headline and panicking, which I think there's an awful lot of that in the world right now. So if they go to CISA, they're going to find actual tools that will help them figure this out, right?
Yeah, so I think what we've tried to do is to make one-stop shop resource pages on these emerging incidents. So whether it was the SolarWinds and Microsoft Office 365 compromises late last year, or the Exchange vulnerabilities now, if they go to our website, CISA.gov, there'll be a place on the website with all that information together. It will have and point to the resources that are not just CISAs. So for example, Microsoft has released a great tool really geared towards those small and medium-sized businesses. That's one click to identify whether their system has been compromised. And we encourage people to kind of go there and use those tools, read the Microsoft blog. We also have our own alerts and emergency directives on there for people to understand kind of guidance step-by-step, kind of critical things that they should be doing, what they should be looking for. And we are always releasing new tools and capabilities as we develop them. In many cases, those are the tools that our hunt and incident response professionals are using themselves. When they go and do an IR, when they're hunting in a network, they're going to try to develop those detection tools and make those more broadly available to our private sector and our state and local colleagues. So we'll have them up on our GitHub page and linked from our CISA.gov website. So it's a great resource, not just for the things that CISA does, but for the entire community.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to remember in this day when we're inundated with information that there are still some places out there where you can kind of go get a comprehensive look at these threats and what you should be doing about them. We have a question I'd like to kind of just bring into the conversation here from one of the people who is listening with us. He says, sure. A big complaint from many companies is the lack of specifics in some of the briefings and the products that we've just talked about due to classification and sources and methods. The big no-no in Intel is you can't ever disclose sources and methods. What can be done to improve the specificity, he asks, and the depth of briefs and reports so they can be more actionable in the future? This is a question I'm sure you've heard 1,000 times before.
Yeah, I mean, this is a perennial tension in terms of the information sharing architecture more broadly. What I can say is that we have made tremendous strides, even in just the past year, in our ability to get more information out more quickly at a level that is publicly accessible. We showed that last year during the election when we saw initially targeting from Russian actors that were targeting some state and local networks. And in less than a week, we got that information from being highly classified to being public, and CISA and the FBI doing a release. 3 weeks later, when Iranian actors were attempting to influence the election, we were able to, in 72 hours and less, get information from highly classified to publicly available. But even more recently, I would say on the incidents, both the SolarWinds and Office 365 compromises and the recent Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities, all of the information we have on these incidents is at the unclassified level, save one small piece related to attribution. And frankly, that is not going to help a single network defender improve their security. Everything that is going to provide value to the network defense community is publicly available today. And that is something that we continue to strive for. We really believe CISA is an important advocate within the government, with the intelligence community, to get more information out at lower classification levels to enable that network defense community, wherever they are, to improve their security. So that's kind of our commitment. And I would say we've made real progress with the intelligence community over the past several years. And I think things now are kind of night and day to where they were 5 years ago or more.
You mean in terms of understanding the need to get this information out
Understanding
faster?
the need and working hard to get to that point.
Yeah. Let's talk about vendors for just a moment. You also said recently there's a lot that we need to do through the federal contracting process to ensure that the vendors providing IT products and services for the federal government have the appropriate level of cybersecurity in place themselves. We've seen this time after time in the public sector when breaches are disclosed, that oftentimes the hackers will reach systems through third-party vendors. So how is the government thinking about protecting itself and making sure that the vendors that the government relies on, because clearly the government has to rely on the private sector in order to do its job, is implementing that same level of security that is required?
Yeah, and I in fact think that this is not only where the government is helping itself, but the government wants to use its unique market position to help shape that market and improve that the security of the vendors that are providing software products and services, not just to the federal government, but to the entire community. And so we've been working, in the interagency, White House led, to examine what are the options for improving that, particularly in the software development cycle. What additional standards need to be developed, particularly for software and products that are likely to have escalated privileges inside of networks. And I think that there's just a lot more that we can do. And I think in the coming weeks, you will see the government roll out some of its initiatives in this area.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you too, let's talk about elections for just a minute. CISA has come, as you said, a long way in terms of what it's been able to do to detect any type of influence with elections or hacking with election systems. It came a long way from 2016 to 2020. You said your office is in the process of doing sort of the after action reports. Are there any sort of things that are coming out from those that you can share with us about ways that the government can make itself even more secure from these efforts when it comes to future elections?
Sure. I mean, I think the big one, and one of the big areas that we're going to be continuing to focus on over the next 2 years is what we kind of call the last mile. There are over 8,000 election jurisdictions throughout this country. And while we have made tremendous strides improving the connectivity between CISA and election officials at the state and local level, there is still a lot of those kind of smaller communities, election jurisdictions that we've not yet touched. And we want to get there. And it's not just CISA operating alone. In many cases, that's CISA operating in close partnership with the state election officials, whether it's the Secretary of State, the state election directors. How do we improve the security further down that food chain to those local communities, which are usually the kind of the first touch points, the initial entry points into the system. And so that's going to be a significant focus. We did a lot of that work in 2020, but there is certainly a lot more that we can do. There are a number of states that have operated kind of unique models where they've deployed actually their own state personnel down to counties, for example, to help them with their cybersecurity posture. And so we want to explore a number of options depending on the nature of that state's authorities and what kind of tools and services we can offer. But how can we get more scalable services down at a lower level? I think that's going to pay huge dividends in the years to come.
And the Washington Post had a piece out today actually saying that state and local governments have been begging the government for more resources since they're right on the front lines of a lot of these cyber attacks. Would you say that's true?
I think absolutely. I think this is an area where everyone is, I think, coming around to the full recognition that cybersecurity needs sustained investment over time. It is not cheap. It is not easy. There is no silver bullet. There is no one technology that's going to solve it. It requires multiple layers of protection, multiple layers of defense, an integrated technology, people, process, mindset, and that just requires sustained investment. And I think, I've been saying that the $650 million we received as part of the American Rescue Act is a down payment on what we're going to need to secure the .gov. But the state and local governments are in many cases in the same boat. They've got tight budgets, and cybersecurity, in order for them to have the level of security that they need, given the risks that they're increasingly facing from ransomware and others, it needs sustained investment, and the department wants to be an important advocate for that.
We've also heard a lot of talk today, really, really fantastic talk, I think, about the need for better situational awareness between government and the private sector, and sort of the need for different platforms, maybe it's software. How do you feel about that? I mean, what do you think, first of all? Do you agree that there needs to be sort of more centralized platforms, software, whatever the answer may be, that everybody can access, that every private company can access to get sort of faster information about threats so they can implement? What are your thoughts on that? Because I don't think that there's a single cybersecurity expert out there that doesn't go to sleep thinking about these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's I think it's something that everyone can easily agree with, but the solution space is just difficult. How do you kind of create something that is both at that scale, useful, manageable, and I don't think we've figured it out just yet. I think we are trying to kind of make baby steps in that direction, even inside the federal government. How do we improve our ability to have the right level of situational awareness and visibility in the face of increasingly complex networks, as people over the past decade have moved from largely on-premise networks to on-premise networks with mobile, to cloud hybrids, some on-premises, some mobile, some virtualized, et cetera. We need improved ways of having good situational awareness and visibility across that full spectrum. And then how do we do that in a way that's shareable and integratable with our key partners that have that level of insight in the private sector, whether it's the large ISPs and cloud vendors, whether it's the threat intelligence companies. There needs to be more there. I think a lot of this now is done, unfortunately, not at machine speed. It's done by sharing indicators. It is done in meetings to work out a game plan. And I think the goal now is to take all of that good work, all of that partnership that has been developed, and how do you make it more automated? How do you make these systems talk? And I think that's going to require time, hard work, and some additional resources.
So we may have touched on some of this, but I'm going to ask this question, and I don't know how much of your time, we started off with your day-to-day, like, I don't know how much of your time you're actually able to interface directly with, sort of the government agencies and the private sector, but I'm really interested to hear, what are they telling you? What are they telling you that they need right now in order to protect, their federal government agencies and also private sector?
Sure. I mean, I think, frankly, a lot of it, starting with our state and local colleagues, it's resources. They need the ability to kind of sustain resources. That some of the programs we have, like grants, are a good start, but it's hard to build a long-term program when it's related to grants that might change or might lessen in a year or two. At the federal level, we are working hard with our federal partners to identify the suite of capabilities that they need, and in many cases, these are things that were highlighted by the SolarWinds campaign, where do we have the right level of visibility into my network? Will I know what's happening if a SolarWinds Orion product starts talking in an encrypted channel to a server that it has never spoken to before outside of my network? Do I have that level of visibility? And so a lot of what we are trying to do with the new resources that we have received is build in capabilities that the federal government across the board has recognized are essential and are just not widely deployed. Things like improved endpoint detection and response, improved logging in both the cloud and on-premise environments. What is the ability for both CISA and those agencies themselves to hunt inside of their environment? Do we have the right security logging in place? Is it in a centralized place where you can hunt across a large, complex, federated network? So there are a lot of both technical and process challenges that we're going to be overcoming. But these are some of the big issues that we're tackling right now.
So I
think
hate to
one
ask
more, Suzanne,
this.
just one more I want to hit, and that's the move to zero trust environments. I think everyone recognizes that the move to a zero trust architecture is essential to being able to protect and to limit the damage if cyber incidents happen. But the transition from kind of current legacy networks to a zero trust environment is challenging, and I think a lot of agencies, private sector, anyone who's kind of in the midst of that transition is looking for assistance. What is the pathway that we could take? And so part of the resources that part of our spend in that new resources is going to be looking at what that guidance would look like and how do we provide assistance to agencies that are embarking upon that move to zero trust architectures to make it as easy as possible. Reduce the pain. Won't be able to eliminate it, but we want to make it as easy as possible.
So you're in the acting director role, which I think is always a difficult seat because you know that you're kind of like biding time for someone else to come in, but my gosh, this is a hard day job and you can't afford to not be focused on it 100% every day. As we sort of get toward a little bit closer to the point where there will be a new director of CISA coming in, you know, are you going through those conversations in your head when you sit down to say, here's what you need to know right off the bat? Tell us a little bit about what's top priority for you in that briefing that you're going to have.
Sure. I mean, and we've had some practice at this because during the transition between the administrations, we spent a lot of time helping to make sure that the Biden-Harris team, when they were still in the transition, were fully prepared to take over leadership on January 20th. So we spent a lot of time with our agency review team, walking them through the challenges that we were facing, where we think they needed to focus their attention. And what efforts we'd recommend that they needed to pursue. A couple of the issues that were top of mind for me, and some of which we've touched upon today. One is CISA's broader role when it comes to disinformation and misinformation coming out of the 2020 election. You know, I think we were in the midst of the fight in 2020 and watched in real time as our program that was initially designed to counter foreign interference kind of slowly shifted where it was no longer just foreign interference, but it was mis and disinformation more broadly, emanating from multiple sources domestically and internationally. And where is the CISA's role going to be in that in the future? And I think that there's we're eager to kind of have that conversation. Our team internally has been doing some thinking about the direction, but I think that's going to be an important one for the new CISA director to weigh in on. One of the other areas that I had hoped to spend this transition doing more work on was the question related to, are we really optimizing our information sharing platforms with the private sector given today's threats? Frankly, some of the recent cyber incidents have prevented us from spending as much time on that, but it is certainly going to be one with the new CISA leadership where I'm going to want to make that one of the top priorities for he or she to focus on. So those are just two of the many issues, and being the acting director has been an incredible experience. Looking forward to transitioning to a permanent political leader. But until then, I've got my hands full and have to work full out every day to make sure that I'm doing the work that the American people have entrusted this organization with.
I can't even imagine what your day-to-day is like. Thank you so much. Any closing thoughts to leave us with before you go? I know you've got a number of things on your agenda this afternoon.
No, Suzanne, just want to thank you and thank all your members. I think you're doing an incredible service to the entire community, hosting a really great lineup of speakers. I'm really honored to be a part of it. And you know, we know we've got a lot of work to do. We are eager to help, and we're looking forward to partnering with our private sector partners, with our federal partners, with our state and local community to help achieve this really important mission. And really thank you and other members of this community for helping to get that message out more broadly.
Acting Director Brandon Wales, leading up CISA, thank you so much. You've got huge job that, again, I don't think any of us envy, but is really critically important in the mission forward on cyber. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.